18 months after the Myanmar military launched a coup, the country is in the midst of a brutal civil war. Across the nation, thousands of young people have put their lives on hold to join an armed struggle against the military. Some of the fiercest resistance to the coup is coming from the mostly Christian Chin community in the remote west of the country. Outgunned but determined, they are proving to be a formidable force.
The people have, for the first time, a real opportunity to get rid of the military, however powerful it might be.
Like many who have been forced to flee Myanmar, they watch on as their country falls apart. Leaving Aizawl behind, we head for the long, porous border between India and Myanmar. Chin State, or Chinland as it's known to the locals, is one of the most remote and least developed regions in the country. Just jumped on board a longboat to cross the India-Myanmar border. On one side is peace and the other total war. But this is a forgotten war. We're on our way to Chinland to meet some of those who have given up everything to fight for their country, to fight for freedom. Since the war began, this part of Chin State has been cut off from the rest of the country, with the military blocking supply lines. Locals now depend on cross-border trade for food, medicine, even motorbikes.
You're listening to a special version of the Insight Myanmar podcast, which covers the fallout from the military coup and the democratic resistance. During this crisis, we're not only ramping up the production of our podcast episodes, but also our blog and other social media platforms as well. So we would like to invite you to check these out, along with signing up for our regular newsletter. All of our other projects have been paused indefinitely so we can focus entirely on this emergency. But for now, let's get into our show. I'm pleased to be joined here with Matt Davis, and you heard some of his documentary, a clip of that to start from the intro. The documentary is called On the Front Line of Myanmar's Forgotten Civil War from Foreign Correspondent. And we're going to talk a bit about this documentary, the Myanmar conflict in general, as well as Matt's experience in Myanmar. So Matt, thanks so much for making time to join us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's jump right into this intro that we just heard, in which you bring the listener in describing what is really just a simple journey, but is actually much more than that. And this is not just the introduction of the film. This is also your personal entry into a conflict zone, as well as the reality of what is happening in one part of Myanmar now.
Yeah, absolutely. So for many years, I've been covering the story of Myanmar, and of course, like everyone that loves the country or watches the country, when the coup unfolded, there was a real sense of shock and a real sense of disbelief. Now, at that time, the media, foreign and Burmese, Myanmar media, were able to cover the events that were unfolding, at least for that first brief period before the military unleashed, violent force against the peaceful protesters. What we saw was, in that immediate aftermath was the pressuring of the Burmese journalists and those covering the story that, in that 10 years of democracy, if you will, some type of democracy, we saw a real thriving local journalism industry within the country. I'd formerly lived there the last time under the military regime, and journalists and people that worked in that space were it wasn't very easy. There came at a lot of risk. What we saw with after the coup was that, these journalists that had started to sort of live and work just like their comrades or colleagues, I should say, in Western countries or other nations, where they had a freedom of speech to some degree, they started to be rounded up and put in prison and so on. And then simultaneously, foreign journalists in the country were being pressured to leave, and some were detained, we saw, but ultimately were able to be released. So journalism kind of disappeared within the country as we know it. Yeah, there was anyone caught sharing information, anyone caught with anything on their phones would be, could be arrested, could be summary arrested, tortured, etc. So covering the conflict became something of a logistical nightmare for people both in the country and the foreign media who were outside of the country. A lot of coverage of the Myanmar crises that happen over time does focus around the border area with Thailand and in some ways China. So that's sort of eastern side. But I was I had begun communications with some groups through the Chin resistance, and who suggested that, if you could come up here to northeast India, there is a very large porous border. It's a region of the world that many people couldn't even point a finger to a map and say, there is Mizoram, or maybe more famously, there's Nagaland. But there's this long, hundreds and hundreds of miles long of rivers, valleys, totally rugged borderline with Myanmar. So in having these conversations with these various groups, it was proposed that I would make my way to first Delhi, India, and then head further to the northeast region of India, where we spent a day or two, a very long day, if you will, driving to one of these border areas, quite remote, no security forces, of course, either Indian or Myanmar. And we were able to cross over using a boat, as you may have just heard in that tape from the film, crossed over the river, where we were met by some members of these Chin resistance groups. We have the Chin National Army, long-established ethnic armed group, and more recently, as we've seen, the PDFs, the People's Defence Forces around Myanmar, created in Chin State, or Chinland, as they like to call it, the locals. They had twisted that acronym a little bit. Myanmar is a country that loves an acronym. It does your head in, and if you don't know about it. But basically, the PDF up there were known as the CDF, and we were met by them. And myself and a colleague began a journey of a few weeks through Chin State.
Thanks for that. That's a good introduction. For those listeners that might not be familiar with Chin State, of course, Myanmar is filled with so many diverse ethnicities and regions and geography. Can you give us a quick rundown of how you would characterize Chin State and the Chin people?
Absolutely. Like you just said, Myanmar is divided into, a diverse range of ethnic groups, all with their own language, their own traditions, their own culture, their own cuisine. And of course, when we talk about Myanmar, we have to remember that the majority population, the Burma, who dominate the lower lying parts of the region, they make up the majority of, the military, the government, and so on. Burma, when the British arrived, obviously, easy conversion, they called the country Burma. So there's this sort of sense of entitlement or prestige, perhaps, that comes with the Burma majority. However, if you move to the border regions of the country,
these are not Burma states. These are ethnically diverse. We could, I'll rattle off a couple. We have the Karen, Shan, Kachin, Mon, and then where I went, the Chin state. Now, Chin state, actually, I mean, Myanmar's a really large country. It's it's the largest country in Southeast Asia. It's got an extraordinary history, and a lot of these boundaries and borders, they're rather arbitrary. They're kind of hangovers from colonial periods where, some British navigator or whatever they were called would just decide this is the line here or that is the line there. And so where we are in Chin State, they're much more ethnically aligned to those living in the neighbouring state in India of Mizoram, the Mizos. So they share this common ethnicity that sort of known as the Zos. So there's if we look on a map and we look at Chin State, we look towards Yangon and we look towards low-lying Myanmar, it's an extraordinary far away. Whereas if you cross just a few valleys, a few rivers, you're inside Mizoram. So it's one of those curious parts of the world where, despite borders, there's a lot of interconnected culture, marriage, trade, custom, and even language, of course. So the language there spoken by the Chin, it's sort of like, I guess it's a Spanish and Portuguese type phenomenon, whereas they're not exactly the same, the Chin and the Mizos, but they can all communicate and they can all get on. And a lot of that sense of identity is connected back to that Mizoram heritage. It's not Burmese. In fact, they often wanted to make sure I was quite aware that we are not Burmese. We don't listen to their music. We don't eat their food. We don't do their things. Like, this is Chin State, and we're the Chin people. So it is a very unique part of the world. It's also in Myanmar. It's one of the most isolated parts of Myanmar, and also one of the least developed. Now, you've been to Myanmar. People that have been there know that Myanmar is a developing country at best. So to be one of the least developed regions within that country is, it's been left behind. The Chin human rights organisations will actually say that's actually been a policy of the Myanmar power structure to sort of deny them development and access. They are Christians, so that rubs the Burmese majority, that Burmese nationalist element of Myanmar, sort of the wrong way. So the Chin, in many ways, have always been left unto themselves. It's extraordinary low education levels. It's a difficult region because of its mountains for farming and so on. So they really do rely in many cases on what comes from across the border in India, northeast India, Mizoram, the capital there being Aizawl. There are tens of thousands of Chins living there before the coup, and now since the coup, tens of thousands more as refugees who have left the country to, I guess, try to survive. There's not, the aid, the humanitarian aid that these outer regions of Myanmar relied on has all been cut off since the coup, and since the fighting began. So yeah, that relationship is a very strong one across the border in India. So much so that actually these refugees on the Indian side have been, it's a unique proposition, but they've been looked after. Like, in a world where refugees generally are scorned and crushed and put in boxes or cages or, put to the outer, in Mizoram, I've got to say I was really blown away as someone who has covered a lot of refugee and conflict stories to see the welcoming nature of this border and this sort of sense that they were in solidarity with these Chin people who were fighting the Tatmadaw. It's really, there was a story in that. I might have to go back and do it, but so that's basically set it up. It's a distinct ethnic group, and that's about it.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me, we had a guest who had studied that region as well, and the Indian side, and had been following the refugee camps there, had noted that even though Modi and the New Delhi leadership in India were not exactly friendly to the democratic movement, and were actually cozying up with the military, because of the way that the federal democracy works in India, the local municipal leaders had a lot of freedom freedom in being able to make their own policy, whether, I don't know, official or unofficial, and actually welcome those Chin refugees in, even when the upper leadership of the country wasn't so friendly to that. But with looking more at Chin, why did you decide to go in this way? Of all the ways, all the different land crossings, even sea crossings you could have gone to get into other areas, urban, rural, ethnic, why did you choose to come in through Chin and do a documentary about Chin specifically?
Late last year, in the early days, when the fighting first began in Myanmar, as these were sort of running skirmishes, amongst these newly formed resistance groups, if you will. But some of the most some of the fiercest resistance, if you will, to the Tatmadaw and the military bases and so on around the country was actually happening up here in Chin State. People hated the military. They didn't want them there. A lot of people had to flee their lives in Yangon or in Mandalay, other cities, whether doctors, nurses, students, etc. All these people had fled back home due to the coup and this uncertain future that was being presented to them. There was a town that features prominently in my documentary called Chinland. It's one of the larger towns in Chin State. 10 to 12,000 people lived there before the coup. And in September, October last year, so in 2021, in retaliation for these growing attacks from these civil defence force groups against, military targets, the military launched a series of assaults on the town where they basically started firing artillery into the town from their base at the northern end of the area and setting on fire people's homes and killing anyone that got in their way. The first person they killed in late September was actually a pastor who had come out to try to prevent them burning down his church. He was shot. He's only early 30s. He was shot dead. And they actually cut his wedding finger off and stole his ring. So it sort of set the tone for what was going to happen. Remember, the Chin are a very devout Christian community. I mean, 95% say of the community is a very strong Christian outlook. So the targeting of churches and the killing of the pastor was seen as a fairly, deliberate messaging that things were going to get worse, and things did get worse. So over the next month or so, there's, it's a sort of they've been accused of this scorched earth policy on many occasions. If we look back to the Rohingya crises several years ago, this tactic of burning down homes and driving people out of their living areas into, IDP camps and so on we could see this starting to happen. And there was a bit of a campaign that did get some traction in the media, and a group of human rights groups, Myanmar Watchers, penned an open letter to the United Nations saying, look, something has to give. This is, this is the genocidal tendencies here. People of Chin are asking for some help, and so on and so on. So sort of the story did pop up on my radar. I, through some colleagues or through my networks, did speak about the idea of heading to Chinland to tell a story that, at this point anyway, had been, I guess, a little bit underreported. It did get some traction again, the burning down of Chinland, but then it's sort of like with everything, the story moved on. Ukraine happens, other things happen, China and Taiwan. There's always something, right? So Myanmar's the greatest tragedy of Myanmar as a country generally is that it gets the headline for a week or two, and then it generally gets buried because so many other things are happening. Dare I say, Trump's going to say something that's enough to just take Myanmar out of the headlines, which is a tragedy unto itself. But we have, I reached out after this to a couple of Chin-based organisations in India who they were familiar with my journalism, actually. They'd seen some of my reporting, and those that hadn't then went and checked and verified who I was, I gather, because quite quickly a response came saying, look, we would really like you. Like, not many people have expressed interest in coming here. I don't think that's no one's deliberately avoided it. It was just sometimes it doesn't these things have to present themselves sometimes when you're looking at it from thousands of kilometers or miles away. But when those conversations began, I guess there was some good momentum, and I thought, well, you know what, this is a very important part of Myanmar, and we see today, whether it's Chin or Saigon or Mugway, some of these regions out west, they've seen some of the heaviest fighting, also some of the heaviest, I'll have to say, accusations of war crimes for my journalistic rigor. But look, we've seen some terrible things unfolding in these areas, and summary executions of young people, elderly, like innocent civilians, really. Let's be honest. So, yeah, I guess I have the commissioning editor I work with. Spent a lot of time covering rather off the beaten path stories himself when in his younger days. Whether that's West Papua or Timor or Afghanistan and so on. So when I sort of suggested, look, there's a story here, no one's really told it. There was something to be said about it, and I was commissioned, and I then began a process. It took several months actually, like of talking with these groups, and communication is very difficult out there. Like it's not like you can just dial up Zoom and have a big chat or a roundtable chat. Not really. It's like people are flipping SIM cards from one country to another depending on what day it is or where the signal is better, and standing on this hill or that hill. Like it was a very, very problematic communication. But at the end of the day, I have been looking and covering and observing Myanmar for a long time, and these people, the goodwill and the sort of enthusiasm to bring some international media to their story was profound in those communications. And it was decided, you know what, I just have to get up there, and then we'll make decisions. So it's very different to going on assignment. Like, say, if you were reporting on the Ukraine, you would have all these security briefings, and you'd have a team, security detail, and in fact, I have done this type of work. This was very much like, if you could just come here, we'll make it happen, and they really did. Like it was an extraordinary sort of opportunity for me to go there and do this report, but also most importantly, it's the people of Chin State who have been the most receptive to the program themselves, because it was their story told through their people, and it's putting that out there on that international landscape. So, I don't know if there was a particular, there was no moment where I was like, we have to tell this story. It was just more like a series of events unfolded, and it was just, let's go. Nothing's literal. There's no like A, B, C, E, F, G. It's kind of like go A to Z and then land in the middle somewhere. And that's how this felt in many ways. And I'm sure maybe some people listening are probably going, I've had 50 journalists contact me since going, how'd you do it? I want to go. And I'd say it's all well and good, but there's something about the trust and having that relationship and that understanding and the credibility of having lived in Myanmar and knowing people that I think made them easier. It made the Chin side feel at ease somewhat more. But I do hope more media coverage can now be centered on that part of Myanmar as well. But, just broadly speaking, more coverage of Myanmar would be wonderful for the international community.
Yeah, I definitely find from my experience in Myanmar that if it's two things from my time there, it's one is it's a face-to-face society rather than a virtual one, and when you're actually in front of someone, things happen. And the second is that it's not a very theoretical place as far as like, well, I might do this, or if we do this, how would that work, or which day works for you? It's kind of a face-to-face society where you're in front of someone and something happens right then and there, and whatever plan you have up to that moment, just it takes its life in the moment. And so many of my experiences, what then happens when you're standing right before someone is something you never could have planned on, and you just have to get there. But yeah, trust is absolutely massive, and that goes from how much the military dictatorship over the years has broken down so many aspects of society, that if you simply have someone that vouches for you and says, yes, I know this guy. This is my brother, my sister. I trust them. And then it gives you access into all kinds of realms beyond any kind of profession or contract or anything else.
No, absolutely. I was going to say, in many places you need to apply, you put a permit in, you propose this, you do that. There's all these, checks and balances and all along the way. But like you said, Myanmar, it's that genuine human engagement that I think drives decision making. And if you've been lucky enough to experience it, and you'll, it's one of those things. That's why once you've been in Myanmar, you've been part of that community and that way of life. It's hard to walk away from it completely because it's so wonderful. It's so real.
Yeah. I've told this story before. At one point we moved to a new place in Yangon, and after a week of being there, met our neighbor and talked to him in some Burmese and talked a bit about meditation and really became quite friendly with each other. And he just said, okay, you're like my family now, so I'm going to take care of you. We kind of smiled, like, yeah, that's a nice thing to say. We're neighbors, but we're kind of like family. And my God, I mean, like the experiences we had, he was more than family. I mean, he did things that even blood for my wife and I wouldn't necessarily take the level of risk and inconvenience that he had to help us out. And I mean, when the first week we were there, when he said, "You're now like my family," he meant you're now like my family. And really it was, I've told this story before, but I haven't mentioned it in some time. So it's bringing back the memory to me. But it was one of my, when the coup first happened, and like so many people that were outside of Myanmar, it touched me so deeply and was so shocked and felt so small and helpless and wondering what to do. And he ended up sending me a picture of himself in downtown Yangon, just sitting on the street cross-legged with a sign that said something like, we deserve human rights, or don't forget about our democracy. And my heart just went out, because here's this person who's never been political, who's been the warmest, most loving, caring non-family I've ever been associated with, who's done so much for me. And he's out there so vulnerable, just anything could happen to him. And it just, even now I get a little emotional thinking that, because it just moved me so much and just made me realize whatever I can do, I need to do. I need to find a way to do it, because seeing this person that has made me part of his family and is now so vulnerable and exposed, and he's holding a sign that no one cares about. Well, what can I do from here? And that's, in some ways, that's what gave birth to this podcast and our nonprofit as well, of just wanting to find a way to give back. As corny as that sounds, I'm looking for another word, but just the feeling of how much was given to me, that of things I never could have figured out, and however many things went wrong, just by someone saying you're like family, and really meaning we were like family from that point on. And that and I think when we're looking at telling the story of Myanmar, that's why it's so important to have, when foreigners are engaged, whether they're engaged as journalists or scholars or documentarians or aid workers or development or diplomats, whatever else, it's so crucial that they have some kind of lived experience of the country and culture. Because when you just I think Myanmar has long been a victim of superimposing other ideals or concepts or theories that worked in some other place by someone who just doesn't understand the shape of Myanmar society as a culture, and the shape that it's taken on from the invisible shape, and the way it's been affected from all those years of dictatorship and suppression and oppression by the military. And that's come back again. And so having people that understand that, not to say that they've lived through it, that they get it, that they've been anywhere near what the Myanmar people have been through, but that they have some lasting experience to understand and interact with it, rather than just applying superimposed models from somewhere else, I think is so important in trying to do justice and authenticity and bringing out those voices.
That's right. And I'm lucky as a journalist. Look, I'm based in Sydney, Australia. I work for this ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. My brief in my role at the program like Foreign Correspondent is to travel the world and report on the good, bad, and ugly, or hopefully beautiful things as well. Like, it's a mixed bag of what we do in countries, but Myanmar is a place with a bit of that lived experience, and more, I guess it's the understanding of, like you mentioned, of that isolation, that sort of the fact this country is cut off, but then for so long, and then seeing that change and that growing movement. I spent time with the Burmese hip hop artists in 2007, 2008, of which recently, politicians say, oh, he was a hip hop rapper. He was executed in recent times. Like I spent time with these people, and not as an overbearing force, but just as a contemporary. And I shared things with them. I brought skateboards from Bangkok at one point, and I got kids skateboarding in 2007 in some park on the fringes of Yangon. Like, there were a lot of these amazing experiences, but also in that time, the Myanmar community aside, I was also lucky to be friends still today with many long-term foreigners who perhaps are married or, like yourself, work there on and off over various periods, wearing different hats. And I've already had that. I've often had that. Sorry. I do have that sounding board when I'm hearing something reported in the bigger media or something. The ability to be able to ring someone who really does understand that and check, is this right? Like, is that the way? And they might say, actually, you know what, you're looking at, that's just that classic over the top news way of looking at it. I think you're better off going this way, talk to this person. So every step along the way with me as a journalist, as a filmmaker, I do my checks and balances with people who not only know the country and who have lived in the country, but they really love the country. So it's the interests at heart are the people of Myanmar. And I think what we're seeing now globally and within the country for the first time is this unification of people, these different ethnic groups, of these international communities. There is only one goal now, that is to remove the military and restore democracy to the country of Myanmar. So that I think there's the unified element to this story is what gives me hope that things might change, and it may still take some time, particularly if they're not supported by the international community. But it feels like it's a different period here now from when I last lived in Myanmar, under the military in 2007, 2008. But that's good.
Yeah, that's right. And that actually leads into the next question I wanted to ask, because you personally have an extensive experience in Myanmar, not just during the transition period, like many people now who are reporting on it and came during that time, but before the transition happened, when it was still a military dictatorship. And you also have experience in other conflict zones, going in places that are tense, where there's conflict taking place. So what I'm wondering is, this recent trip that you went on to Chin State, if you were to contrast your previous experience in Myanmar when it was a military dictatorship, as well as other experience in conflict zones, to compare your recent experience with this background, what stands out? What would you say is different from those two?
Well, I guess the main difference is probably the geography of it all. I mean, having been in, having mostly based myself in Yangon, even if this was under the regime, you're living in a city and an urban life. It's a very different experience. The Chin landscape is extraordinarily different. That remote, it's very country, very regional, very rural. The main difference, perhaps, though, I'd say about my period from when I was living there last, in between, and then now post-coup, is that there was that overwhelming sense of outrage amongst the people of Chin State that they had this sort of a better future, not promise, but there was a better future on the horizon. There was a way forward for Myanmar. It was growing. All these young people, and again, it's probably important for the listener to know that, these people fighting the military are mostly those young ones who are on the streets protesting in the immediate aftermath of the coup. So we're not talking seasoned, experienced soldiers or, people who've done tours to Iraq or Afghanistan. And, American listeners they understand that you've got a military element to your culture over there. They don't. There is the military, that's there, but these are kids. So I do wonder, before, again, when that period of democracy came in, there was this whole generation of young people across Myanmar who saw opportunity, who saw, they had Facebook, they had one of my characters in the program was the runner-up in Myanmar Idol. I mean, this is a universal pop culture thing. Like they had all of that going on, plus all of the amazing cultural elements of, indigenous to their country. So you had it was that melting pot of all these things. It was an exciting time, there's like, whether it was the hip hoppers or it was the, Myanmar Idol, or it was food or tourism and travel and students going, lots of Burmese kids coming to Australia to study English or get degrees. Like it was a happening time. So then to see that all ripped up and crushed overnight, or more in a very short period, it triggered something. So all these people I met in Chinland, they weren't all farmers and rural types. Many were, but actually the majority of the people I met were young people of Chin who they were students. They were studying. One was a DJ. There was a DJ I met. He used to throw parties in Yangon. He moved back to Chinland, the town we talked about before, and his house was burnt down. And he wanted to pick up his weapon to fight the military because they burnt his house down, and his turntables were burnt in that fire. And he was pissed off because he was like, "I'm a DJ, man. I've lost my identity. I'm going to war." There were other people I met, like football players. There was one player, he was in the Myanmar under 21 and under 23 national squad. Like the guy he had a future playing professional football. He had travelled. We sat around a fire one night with a little barbecue and a glass of whiskey, and he was showing me, this is me in Thailand. This is me in Hong Kong. This is me in Korea. Like he had this amazing lifestyle, like young law students, and so on. And people, so they. It's not like, I don't think anyone chose to join a revolution. I don't think you do choose to join a revolution. I'm talking to this from a very privileged position as a white Australian man, but as someone who's spent 20, 25 years of his life studying and engaging in these type of communities, it's a common theme. Like no one wants war in their life, but for these young ones, I think the sacrifice is what they're prepared to make to this time, make sure that this is the last time this idea of a coup can ever happen. That a military can somehow come into their lives and take it over. They don't want that. They wanted the freedom that they had just got, and in fact they wanted more and more of it. And perhaps that was the fear by the military, that despite having certain checks and balances in place to ensure that they retain some power within government at any given moment, it seemed that the will of the people was pushing more and more to remove some of that from the military, and perhaps that's what triggered it. It was this sort of like, oh God, we don't have much of a chance anymore. With all due respect, Aung San Suu Kyi and that elder generation, they fought this fight for 30, 40 years to get to this point. But I think what we're going to see coming out of this coup, based on the people I met, is that this is a new generation who are going to take over now. This is that elder democratic movement did a remarkable job in turning things around. But really, I think that the tides turn, and this is a younger people-led change in this country.
I'm curious as well about your actual experience of being on the ground there, because as you've mentioned, you've studied Myanmar for some time, you've lived there, so you're familiar with the country, and I'm sure you've been following and even reporting on this story since the coup broke. But when you're actually there, even if you're experiencing things that you know about and that you've heard about, let alone those things that haven't been so reported, and just physically being there, seeing things with your own eyes and seeing interactions, what really stood out to you or surprised you from actually being physically on the ground that taught you things or showed you things above and beyond how you were able to follow it remotely?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, totally. There's nothing like being on the ground, of course. A lot of reporting covering the Myanmar story has been done remotely through, smuggling out footage or talking on phones and sort of in that way. But being on the ground, it was just an extraordinary privilege to join those communities and get in there deep to see It's a classic thing. Chin's a very, a very remote place. There's a lack of power. There's a lack of food. The local church, each village has 3 or 4 churches in it. That's where we had to go to charge our camera batteries, to perhaps get a meal, to do things like that. And despite this lack of, general basic supplies, we were in the way we've talked about before, we were always fed. We were always provided with a place to sleep. Like, there was this huge energy around someone coming here to tell the story, to take our story to the world. So, but it's surreal when I just left India, only a few days earlier, and you're in a thriving city, in a mountainous city nonetheless, but houses, power, cars, all the things, all the mod cons. And then we're inside Chin State, and it's like we're sleeping on dirt floors again, and scrounging for a bit of power from the local church generator for a couple of hours for the batteries, and driving 12 hours to do about 30 to 40 miles to get from A to B, because the road had been a landslide, and there was actually, instead of having any hard machinery to remove that debris, it was hands. It was 20 villagers are out there with handmade shovels and hose digging away these things. So that's like, it was a real return. It was like going back in time. Like, there was such little infrastructure on the ground, but again, the people and the generosity and the resilience to just get on and keep living. It was almost like, in some ways, until we arrived near the front line or the hospital, where we engaged with people who were directly involved in the conflict. Like, a lot of these people, their lives, it felt like not much had changed, but again, it was that their children who actually had left the homes to go and join these resistance groups, and that was the big thing. It was a deep sadness amongst the elders and the young children, but also this really extraordinary sense of pride. Like, I met one mother in the hospital whose son had lost his eyesight, and he had burns all over him from a landmine. He was making landmines, and he had an accident and blew himself up, and he, with 2 of his other friends, who tragically passed in that thing. And this is in some ways indicative of an example of sort of the rudimentary weapons they're using, the men trying to do their own thing. But anyway, in that hospital, I talked to the mother, and I said, "Oh, like, are you afraid of him, or do you want him to come home?" She says, No. Like, I'm proud of him. My 2 other sons, they're all joined these resistance groups. They have to fight. Like, it made me get a bit teary, a little bit chicken skin, going like, oh, like, as a parent myself, to think that I would just be prepared to, give away my children to this situation. It was probably a real, it was a moment, but it really just did show just how committed, how unified the people of Chin State were in this sort of struggle. And I think, again, you'd find a similar phenomena playing out across the country now, particularly in those ethnic regions where, the fighting is raging, but these communities are really there. But it's always the thing, that just to be on the ground inside Myanmar, and just the motorbikes, and you get to the end of the day, but there was a bowl of soup or a place to put your head down. And these lovely people who just wanted to know and say, "Thank you for coming. Thanks for coming." And it was you take that with there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. But I hope, and I think we did pretty well in the way we presented that show. I mean, the people of Chinland have been ringing and sending messages. I got 5,000 Facebook friend requests overnight, the night I went to it, from people in Chin State I've never met, but which makes me and the team behind it happy, because, at the end of the day, there's journalism and your colleagues and the world of media and out here. But, if the film lands for the people that it's about and they're happy, then that's the job well done.
Yeah, right. And I think there was just a sense, just from being yet another person online who saw something come up, that, oh, this is not just a local account doing this or someone doing this on their own. This is actually a noted platform that's deciding to and is not just covering it remotely, but is actually sending a staff member to go and report on it with video and audio and translation, and then it's going to be on their big platform. It was kind of this feeling of like, oh, we're being seen, where the story is getting out there by someone somewhere. And there's just been this sense for those that are Myanmar, care about Myanmar, that you've alluded to already, of just how hard it is to get this story and this information out there and to have it break through. And so I guess I'm wondering, with your background, not just being familiar with Myanmar, but also your profession being a reporter, first, why do you think it's been so extremely hard to get out a story that has everything you would want a story in it, from the drama, the history, the conflict, heroism, sacrifice, more stories than one would want of the devastation that's going on? It's been so incredibly hard to break through and have people care. And then the other part of that question, how to do that. And I'm sure this is something you're thinking of yourself, so you don't necessarily have all the answers, but given that so few have broken through on a wider platform, do you have any thoughts of how these stories can come out and break through more, so that they're not just flashes in the pan, or they're not just brief little snippets or brief snapshots, but something that is actually educating people, bringing them in depth, and having them going beyond just the surface headline?
Yeah, you know, there are times in this process where I hate to admit it, but not really. But I struggle with sleep sometimes, because I'm tossing and turning, going, how do we get this thing? How do we get it? How do we get it out? Like and especially when I've, having that again in this extremely amazing period where I was there and I met people and I see them and I'm thinking, how do I get that story out? Like that doctor or that soldier or that lawyer, or that mother, or blah, blah, blah. You've got all these things, and it's, I have, no conflict is everything. They're all horrible, right? And I have beautiful friends in the Ukraine who have suffered a similar fate. They're young people with their futures, ripped off by once again another totalitarian egomaniac type character, Putin, online. I mean, in 2022, you'd think, what do we need these blokes in power for anymore? Like, let's just get rid of them, right? Surely the reckoning's coming, where one day we'll wake up and we'll have young women running the planet and things will be a much better place. But this actual conundrum of getting Myanmar coverage, I mean, I'm talking to you in the United States. I think in Australia, it's even more perplexing, because we're a regional democracy, and Myanmar has long looked to places like, India or Thailand, but particularly Australia as this sort of beacon of human rights and democracy. And I'm not saying that Australia gets it all right. Absolutely not. We've got plenty of things we can nitpick on, but as a broad brush, it's an example in our region, and it's a place we engage in, whether through Indonesia and ASEAN and so on. So for us, there's a collective of journalists who have covered these stories over the years, and it just, you just have to slap yourself in the face sometimes, going like, why won't they pick this story up? This happened with the Rohingya crisis as well, and it almost feels like it's only when it's at its peak, the worst of the worst moment, you'll get the immediate coverage. Where I feel like this story, like you said, Myanmar, it's got everything you could want. You've got an evil dictator, you've got financial institutions, you've got Russian gun supply, you've got Chinese border interests, you've got there's so many elements to this story that should be enough to satisfy some demand. But sadly, if we use the Ukraine as an example, they're Caucasian, there's US involved, and the UK and Europe, and it's the center of Western Europe, or, the fringe of Western Europe. So there's a threat to the world we know, perhaps, is something that gets that attention. Some journalists spoke to me the other day saying, the Ukraine's really become a forgotten war. And I was like, mate, I've got a film out this week called Myanmar's Forgotten War. Like, hey, what do you mean? I'm not saying, and again, with all due respect, especially to my Ukrainian friends, I'm not saying that it's better or worse. I'm going, at least the media's like every day is covering Ukraine, right? Like there's something almost every day.
I'm sure you know as well that the Forgotten War was what they called the Burma Front in World War II.
Exactly. So history repeats itself, right? And here we are. Yeah. This has happened again. And I'm sure in '88, the student uprising there would have been an insane phenomenon. There's a moment where it's this huge thing. people are killed on the streets, the news covers it, and then it moves on. What's probably different now, well, not what's probably, what is different now is that the Myanmar, people on the ground are actually still able to get material out, obviously, with the, even though the internet is limited. And there are very good Myanmar media outlets, of course, your podcast, but, Myanmar run, like Myanmar Now and the Irrawaddy and DVB and so on. And a lot of those groups, actually, there's a lot based here in Australia now. A lot of the journalists got protection visas, and out of Melbourne there's a gathering of Burmese journalists working at any given moment, publishing and so on. So there's more opportunities than say a decade or two ago for these stories to come out. But so you can find it if you want to know about Myanmar. But sadly, the people that want to know about Myanmar kind of already know about Myanmar, right? The people like you and I and people listening to the podcast are like desperate for the information. But then breaking into the mainstream, if you will, or the broader news media market, it's a very difficult proposition. I live here in Sydney, Australia. I live down near the beach. When I'm not covering War and Peace, I'm usually surfing. One of my greatest measuring or yardsticks is when I'm in that community, and people who, generally speaking, might not even know where Myanmar is, definitely don't know where Chin State is, are totally aware of what's happening in the Ukraine or China, Taiwan, or Israel, Palestine, because those headlines are everywhere, or Trump and the wall or whatever it is. There's always those big alpha headlines that dominate. But on this one, I did get a little pat. I'm quite happy about this. A lot of people were like, "Man, I saw your film. Like, shit, I did not know about that." And that was so. I was crying, dude. Like, wow, I had no idea, and I felt I'm not stupid, but I couldn't believe I knew such little, and I was like, it really drove home just how difficult it is. People will. If it's good journalism and the stories like that are heartfelt and character focused and less reporter, more like what's the person on the ground, what do they got to say, then your average surfing dude or surfing girl here in Australia is going, wow. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to do that little gear shift that it's on their radar now, right? It might not be what they live for every day, like you or I read the headlines, what's happening now, like what's Al Jazeera saying, what's the but it might be enough for them to go like, oh, I heard about this place, Myanmar, man, it's really no good. Like, people going, what could I do? And it's tough to, I don't know, what do you do? I might ring an NGO, help them out. But the reality is it's baby steps, but we have a very serious revolutionary war going on here in our backyard in Australia. So I think it needs to be done. It needs to be kept there front and center. The United States, Europe, these are all countries that before this coup were heavily invested in Myanmar, and lots of great things, whether it was cultural development or NGO help or business, and we still have, this is an issue we have to consider with sanctions and, oil and gas, Chevron and companies like that who are still dancing around the fire of the dictatorship and to get what they need. And, I think that's those storylines are also something we need to keep looking at. How are our governments and companies engaging with this story? And I don't know exactly what it is, but there is something we're working on about that type of thing, I believe, probably for next year, because, these things take a while to get across the line. But, there was an interesting interview by an Australian UN expert who had done a lot of time in Myanmar and sort of unpacked the military's financial companies in my last documentary, What's Happening in Myanmar. And he said it's a very simple thing to finish this coup or finish this sort of war. Cut off the guns, cut off the money, and cut off the impunity. So if you cut off their arms, cut off their money, cut off their impunity, they got nothing left, they'll fold, because the people don't want the military anymore. They don't want that. So, it is on the international community to actually help this situation conclude or resolve itself, hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah, right. And I think another analogy I'd give than baby steps would be momentum, and that there's this possibility and this reality of momentum in caring about Myanmar, and that every person has, wherever they are, has the ability to add to that momentum, however small. Listening to this podcast is one way. Listening and then sharing is one way to add to the momentum. Watching your documentary, the same thing. And above and beyond that, one can donate or advocate to talk to local newspapers or members of parliament or Congress or whoever. And all of those things matter, because I think in the past, Myanmar has it's been these flashes in the pan that people don't really understand completely, and then things pass. And I think one of the military strategies has always been I think one thing you have to give them credit for is understanding that the world has a short attention span, and trusting that whatever atrocity they can do in the moment, if they just kind of let the water settle, then people will move on to the next thing, and they can move ahead with impunity. But, that hasn't exactly happened this way. And at this time in this revolution. And on that note, when we're looking at trying to understand Myanmar and trying to understand the complexity of the history and the Bamar, the different ethnic groups, the role of the military, role of Buddhism, etc., the role of the current revolution as well. There's so many things packed in there. It's certainly not reasonable that one person would be expected to have an understanding and know all this. That's why I enjoy these podcast conversations so much. We get to go in different areas of where that expertise is. But just to narrow that down a little bit and look at like the way you're a journalist who has reported on Myanmar. And so by doing so, I'm sure you've also read a number of articles and documentaries on Myanmar. You've talked to other journalists. And so one of the things I'm curious about is, generally speaking, what can you point to in terms of how Western media or foreign media is not getting things about Myanmar, either in general or at this current time in this current revolution? With your knowledge, with your experience, with your reporting and contacts there, what kinds of trends do you see occurring in media that one can say can be consistent, or a pattern in some way that you that speaks to you of like, oh, this is something they're continuing to miss, or this is something they're continuing not to understand?
I think one of probably the standard reporting on Myanmar, particularly those without much in-depth knowledge of the thing, is often to focus on the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi and that storyline, because that's been the big, the good versus evil narrative we've seen with Myanmar for decades. Yeah, the military versus the lady, and that's a very relevant storyline as well. But again, to what I've been talking about here, and going back to what my film sort of focuses on, and I do know there's another film of a similar, Myanmar's Forgotten Revolution, circling around at the moment, Channel 4. Evan Williams is an Australian journalist as well. He's out there. So there seems to be, you mentioned momentum. It's been 18 months since the coup. There has been a shift back to a little bit, particularly sadly, tragically, because the execution of those 4 democracy activists a month ago. I think that brought the spotlight back, because people globally, even regionally, like ASEAN, members of ASEAN, Cambodia, Malaysia, people that never would normally say anything, because it's such a wet fish as a what's the word? What's the group? Like as a grouping of nations, they don't particularly talk down on people, but there was some reaction. I was like, hey, that's not good. Like, and some, despite the tragedy, some would say it was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, because they're actually under pressure now. Like there's also so much going on in the country that they just thought they might execute for these democracy activists, and people would, somehow be cowered into, giving up their fight or their resistance. I think it's probably had the opposite effect. In fact, every time there's another horrific atrocity is documented in the Myanmar, through social media or something, I think there's a real sense, and we talk about this in my film with some of the senior generals in the Chin National Army. It's like they think they're going to crush people's spirit. They're just bringing more people together. Like people are like, you're going to do that to a woman or a child or an innocent elderly man? Well, I'm sorry, I can't support you. I'm going to support those PDF fighters and so on. Long way around. What I'm getting at is, I think the storyline now has moved to focus much more on these young people, because I guess 6 months ago, last time I did a story on, a documentary type program on the story, even though these youth, if you will, had picked up weapons, they were rudimentary. We talked about before, the 2Me, they're like single barreled, hunting rifles from 100 years ago. Some of them were. There's a real sense that none of this would actually have a chance of defeating this heavily armed Russian-supplied military beast with helicopters and jet fighters and submarines and, a rather ruthless reputation. But actually, this time now, when we've just recently approached the storyline, things have changed. Like, they've managed these young groups, they're across the country now. It's a war on all fronts. While not all identify with the shadow government, the National Unity Government, the NUG is growing in its sort of presence globally. It's engaging in Washington, D.C., it's engaging in Europe. They've recently opened an embassy here in Australia, in Canberra, in our capital, which I'll be talking at shortly. A similar thing about your experience on the ground. They're curious. I saw the opening of an NUG defence outpost inside Camp Victoria when I was there with the Chin National Army. What we're seeing, I think, is a new period, and this is where the reporting may evolve and may shift. That it's like, okay, there's a bit more of the moment is real. You mentioned momentum before. There is a sense of momentum now. The young ones are sort of seeing there's an end game. We're seeing military defectors in the thousands, if not tens of thousands, depending on who you get your information from. So this sort of, while sadly there is this horrific war of attrition unfolding across the country, in terms of reporting, there's actually a moment of, I think, maybe a crescendo or a changing landscape, where we've gone from the people being this underdog who are used to being crushed and suppressed, to potentially seeing the Tatmadaw, the Myanmar military, on a much more defensive strategy, sort of just holding space where they can and trying their best to not get caught out in the fields. Like my Chinland, my young fighters who have surrounded the military up there, they say it's like wolf hunting. We know our land, we know the mountains, we know how. So if they come out of here, we just follow them and we'll shoot them. So I guess going back to the journalistic side of it, it's that if it's what's new, sadly, what's good, the news, right? So that someone's always looking for what's new, what's happening. Now is a different time. Like these are stories, and I think you can look at big weaponry in the Ukraine and Syria and things. Feels very distant and almost unhuman, because the weaponry is so advanced and so developed. When you see these young people in, whether it's my film or Channel 4 film, it's sort of like, what is happening here? Like, wow, like they're taking on this military. And I think that's a hook that should be played to more by the media, to sort of go, look at these young people, right, and look what they're up against. But you know what? They're actually doing all right. And everyone I met on that journey was adamant that they were going to win. Like there was, and people have had these moments before in Myanmar's history, but I don't know. It seemed different. Like there was something going on, and that might have been. That's everyone. That's the General Sui Kar from the Chin National Army said. It's not just the resistance fighters. This is everyone here in Chin State, and again, I think this is across the country. It's the women in the village cooking food for the soldiers. It's the school kids collecting firewood. It's it's everyone. Everyone's involved, and there's a great stories there to be told, important stories to be told, and they're human stories. Again, if you tap the human narrative, you tap the human side of it all, people see these shows and they get like, okay, I need to follow this. I need to know more about this place. And like you say, share it, share the podcast, pass it around. I'm hoping very much that there's more. We've had a recent change in government here in Australia, and after several years, since the coup, effectively radio silence from our government, the new government has been much more on the front foot, talking about Myanmar in the press conferences, talking about the human rights abuses, talking about the war, talking about Australia's need to do more. So we keep bringing it back to that word momentum. Perhaps after 18 months of almost zero coverage, and real interest, maybe we're turning a corner, and Myanmar will get more of what it needs, that is the international spotlight.
Right. And I think that when one is talking again about how this story has it all, not only does it have all the human elements of the drama unfolding within the country, but it also has, in at least to my mind, a rather unprecedented story of a country that has been under a ruthless military dictatorship, that all the countries around the world that in theory support some version of democracy and human rights and everything else have basically stood at the sidelines and done almost nothing. And with almost no background training materials, anything, they have defied so many of these so-called experts who at the beginning had their own predictions and are not just holding their own, but are actually predicting an end to this. And that I don't hear too many people these days that are talking about the advantages the military holds. They're certainly a fierce force, and we could see some very bloody days ahead. And if anything, I've had people talk to me connected to the resistance that are saying, look, we think it's an inevitability that we're going to win. The question is, do we drag this out into something messy and bloody day after day that takes forever, or do we get some support where we can just come down with a decisive blow that saves a lot of that preserves some sense of humanity in the end? But then beyond that story, you have the story of what happens next. And of course, there's no telling what happens after a revolution. I've been doing some reading of late of the French Revolution and just reminding myself about the messiness that happened in all the years and decades that followed. But it does have to be said that there is, as you and so many people have commented on, there is a sea change here. And I was even talking to a friend who's connected to the Karen diaspora community and very, very connected to it, to people on the ground, to top leadership, to people in Karen state, kind of taking the temperature in all those different places. And he was relaying to me, it's quite interesting, the older Karen leaders still have this pretty strong nationalist tendency. Nationalist meaning that they want their own state or territory. They're not looking for compromise or cooperation or collaboration with other ethnicities, and it's especially not the Bamar if they can help it. They're trying to be realistic. But the younger generation, the younger Karen generation, he's saying is not like that. And he said he's also been making inroads with the Chin community. Same thing. He's talked with the young Chins, and everyone I've talked to, Kachin and Bamar and others, have fit that similar mold in the sense that they are voicing a desire to want to have a more inclusive community. And people I knew that were never quite Bamar Buddhist nationalists, but they did have concerns about the survival of Buddhism in the country. And if they had to juxtapose a free society that was fair and equitable to all and a society that propagated and preserved the Buddhist teachings, they would very likely choose the second one. Actually, they would. I mean, I know that from conversations before the coup, and in talking to those people after, to a person, they've all shifted, and they all realize that they don't need artificial and violent support from a dictatorship to preserve a faith that is about inner peace and coming out of defilements and attachments and negativities. And so there is this extraordinary sea change among the young people that, if these two things can be accomplished, and I know that's a big if, but actually whether or not they're accomplished isn't really the point. The point is that there is a very real potentiality of both these things, of a pathway for both these things to happen, where a Russian-backed professional military cannot win against what initially was this ragtag bunch of students and young DJs and all other kinds of people that formed to resist them, that they could come out victorious, and that they have a volition to want to create on their own, with no support from these countries that supposedly care so much about it, an equitable and progressive and fair society. And I don't mean to say this, I know as I'm saying this, I'm hearing myself, I don't mean to be sounding naive or idealistic or head in the clouds, but the fact that they want to, and they are trying, and there is a pathway that they could in Southeast Asia. I mean, this is rewriting every history we know of the region happen and of how political systems develop. And the fact that this could happen, this is an unbelievable story for our time, especially when democracy is being threatened in places like my country and others, that this is a place where the people are wanting to proclaim their own democracy. And so I think that not to tell this story in this naive, idealistic way that of course it'll be kumbaya and everything will be okay. But the fact that this could happen and is trying to happen, this is an unbelievable story for our age to be wanting to explore and tell, in the words of those people on the front lines, those young people that you've mentioned that are doing so much.
I couldn't agree more. Look, a year ago, I mentioned before, a year ago, we put together a documentary, #What's Happening in Myanmar, on YouTube right now at ABC News. It was all about military and looking at the power structure that they have and where they get the money from and so on. And because we couldn't travel, what we could do was talk to experts, international observers based here in Australia, and some of these Burmese people who have left and now here on protection visas. Almost nobody in that film I asked them, can they win this war? Is this thing? I don't think a single person said they had any chance whatsoever. In fact, they just feared for what would happen. And some of those fears are true. Like, there's been some horrible violence on both sides, but it is a war. Let's just remember that. But what we've seen is shift, and again, anecdotally, but also like academically, there is this sense of like, the tide has turned now, and there's this real sense of opportunity to defeat this, like we said, professional army, Russian supplied arms, etc. Now, like you said, no one knows what comes next, right, with these revolutions. And I met all these young people who were not formally military inclined. They definitely had never killed people before, but now that's their remit. They're out there to win this war. So you do have to, and not all of them are that old, right? 18, 19, 20, 21. So my editor, Peter Donahue, one extraordinarily talented editor here with me at the ABC, his big concern was looking at them. He'd often take a moment and breathe and goes, what happens though? All these kids, they've all become radicalized, or this sort of, this violence has now crept into them. And there's definitely it's something to be considered about, like it probably won't all be like kumbaya, as you said before, and so on. So there's going to be some people that are a bit like on the edge now, and they're going to have to be brought in line. What might be the key to this is actually that unity, the look towards a more unified country that these young people do have. So again, I think this is the generation who sort of knew that democracy. They hadn't been divided into their ethnic groups as much and their religious lines, because, they'd all been at school or uni together, and they'd have all these new things. Or on Facebook, how do you hate someone when you like their posts, like just because they're a Christian or you're a Buddhist? Look, let's not forget the Rohingya crisis, 2017. We saw more or less the entire country support the eviction of these people. But I reckon if you look at some of the narrative that was coming through the younger NGO, the younger members of civil society, the voices that were coming through, they were actually starting to sort of turn that narrative around. And particularly just before the coup, it was like, no, we have to be unified. And that's probably the way this is going to work, that the Burma people now themselves have experienced the ruthlessness of the military in this period where their people have been killed. It normally wasn't that way. They were normally fighting these distant wars up in the mountains of these ethnic groups, right? And the military not owned the narrative that they were terrorists or they were anti-Buddhist or they were Muslims or whatever line they chose to suit their purposes at the time. Again, with the advancement of social media and interconnectivity amongst young people, I think a lot of that sort of dominant propaganda becomes much more irrelevant. I'm sure you mentioned just before, the elder community members have that mindset, but that's, it's the old thing, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but the young people aren't part of that, or much less so. Of course there are radical elements in all of our communities. Australia, we've got radical elements here, absolutely, but they are fringe and they sadly get a bit too much airtime. I think it's probably the same in America. They get a lot of dominant airspace, which sucks it away from the fact that most people in the United States actually just want to have a pretty good peaceful, respectful lifestyle that doesn't seek to divide the races or along racial lines or religious lines and so on. I think Myanmar is the same, particularly amongst these young people. Again, I'm only talking, I met to the people I spoke with, they wanted is a federal democracy. They want Chin State to be a represented entity in some type of parliament structure. They wanted, Chin State, Korean State, Australia, like America, we're made up of states. And I've got to say, looking from afar, America's about as diverse as Myanmar in many ways, right? There's a lot of, depending on where you're from in America, there's a whole different way of looking at what America is. Myanmar, these young people were saying the same thing. They were like, well, we would like our to be represented so we could speak to our interests, and ensure the Korean, the Shan, if they all were to come together in some type of democracy like that, that's not happened in Myanmar. These ethnic voices have been promised a lot, but have always been somewhat, these promises have always been under-delivered, or if at all, maybe, many times I think things have been put up there. That's why Myanmar's been at civil war. I mean, people forget that. The Myanmar military has never actually won a war. They've been constantly fighting. They've been constantly fighting ethnic groups on the borders. They've had ceasefires and stalemates, but they've never actually won. No one's ever come to the table and said, okay, we're with you, yeah? But this time, at least from what I gather, talking with the Foreign Minister of the National Unity Government and others, is that what they want to do is bring everyone together. And there is one common goal. And if they keep it fairly simple, they might actually succeed. The goal is to get rid of the military, put them back in the barracks, So in a democratic country, you still need a military, you need an armed defence force, sure. Well, that's another whole discourse we could talk about in another podcast. But there'll be a military, that will be true, but they shouldn't be the ones legislating for, whether it's about the education system or it's nursing homes or infrastructure, right? Leave that to the democratic political process. And I think that's what the NUG is trying to keep people focused on. It's like it's a simple goal at the moment, and the senior members of the Chin resistance forces were saying the same thing. The first thing we got to do is just defeat these guys. They need to go away, right? And then we all come together, and how this looks, not sure, and it could be a little bit messy there for a bit, but again, big story. We should be following it, and I personally will be. Where does it go once something like that has occurred? And the NUG's done the right thing. I mean, there's a lot of criticisms from people from all corners, but look, they've got young politicians, they've got ethnic groups represented. I'm not saying it's the be all and the end all, but and again, relaying the messaging from the Chin State, it's a better option than the current option, right? It was just like, well, what are you going to do? You got the military on one hand, or you've got this other group who are working behind the scenes globally to sort of try to bring together some unified sense of opposition. And that was enough for some of the senior general types in the Chin National Army and to be like, well, we're going to back that, okay? And if everyone gets behind that, maybe, just maybe, it could work. And the question again is, how long will this take? Because it seems like there is no going back. Like there is no going back. I interview the doctor in my film, Dr. Amos. He says like, this is the final battle. Yeah, like we will not go back. He was a surgeon, right? A 30-year-old surgeon in Yangon. Like the guy had everything ahead of him. Like I'm a journalist, man. He's a surgeon. I was looking at him and go, how bright are you? And he's stuck in this town with no medicine, no equipment, basically working with him and his wife and another nurse or two to fix all the soldiers and the IDPs. But he was like, this is the final battle. We need weapons. We need supplies, and we need money. So if we look, and as an ABC journalist, public broadcaster, I have to be, journalistically objective, but no one's questioning the supply of weapons to the Ukrainian Defence Force. No one's questioning the supply of finances to the Ukrainian. In fact, it's billions, if not trillions of dollars that float in there on the regular, plus the most highly advanced weapons on the planet. So is there a reason those conversations can't be had about Myanmar? I'm not sure. I think it's a question that we should ask of our governments and be prepared to demand that they do more. And it's on multiple fronts. It's humanitarian, it's diplomatic, it includes sanctions, and it's potentially with real weaponry to support these people. And again, it wouldn't be the first time Western government, if you will, has supplied arms to groups who, they speak for democratic principles. Well, that's what these people are fighting for. So people in Myanmar are kind of like, put your money where your mouth is. Like, come and help us. Like, why have you forgotten us? Like, they look to the world and they look to the Ukraine, they look to all these other things and go, what about us? And instead of you see it in the film, they're fundraising for these things at this point. They're playing concerts over Zoom to the Chin community around the world to like fundraise money to supply food and medicines to refugees and IDPs, or maybe some of that money ends up in weapons or so on. But it's like, it's pretty ad hoc if you think about it. It's like, this is a global problem, and it's been solved on a really local level through, in art exhibitions in London or in Los Angeles or in Sydney here, like little gatherings, like little concerts, like church meetings, like it's sort of like that. Whereas when we look to, again, Europe, it's the global NATO-led resistance to what is also an extremely clear and present danger to the world, the Putin and his allies. But yeah, I think that's one of the last sort of things with our documentary leaves with. It's like, it's not a matter of if, it really is a matter of when. And the longer it goes, the more people will die, the more people will suffer. And that's not in the interest of anybody. Yeah, not in the modern world. There's really no reason for that. And I think my commentator from the Chin Human Rights Organization, Salai Ling, he just says, he points to the democratic world and just says, get your act together. Right? And he actually broke the fourth wall. I know if you know, like filmmaking, like, you sort of do your interview, they're not looking down the camera, they're looking to the interviewer, the reporter, whoever. But he definitely changed his focus and looks down the barrel, which is, it's kind of cool. Yeah, I was like, you know what you're doing. I was like, yeah.
That's great. I'm glad you brought up the doctor, because I wanted to introduce that clip, and you gave some background of him just here, but let's just take a moment and hear him in his own words.
Since my childhood, it was my dream to become a doctor.
Like so many professionals, Surgeon Amos Dot Zemong's career was turned upside down after the coup. He and his wife Rebecca, a nurse, joined the nationwide civil disobedience movement, the CDM. It's a general strike aimed at bringing the government to its knees.
At that time, the military have a statement. All doctors who do CDM, they can arrest us. I don't want to work under the military government.
Leaving the city of Yangon, they returned to Chinland and treated patients in secret clinics. When the regime attacked their home of Tantlang, they fled here and took over this abandoned hospital to treat civilians and resistance fighters.
This is mortal injury. Yesterday in Tantlang, there was a battle. He is also CDF.
Is he hoping to go back to join his battalion?
Yeah, he's so eager to go back.
This young fighter's eyes were damaged in a blast, his body peppered with sulphur. But even his mother is keen for him to return to battle. Are you proud of him fighting in the CDF?
Oh.
Yeah?
Bom kan hand naka kan khon ni se kan hoi la ni kan hoi ko pe wa kai khon leo la mang ka hoi le minung pathum kan sela patni an thi.
Are you afraid fighting this war?
Ti la.
No. If they're caught by the Burmese soldier, what happens to them?
They broke their arms, they broke their legs, and in recent battles, this time they don't even cut off the head. They just tortured with lots of incisions in the neck.
Amos and Rebecca were lucky to escape Tantlang with their lives. Was he born here in the hospital?
Yes.
They rely heavily on each other to keep this hospital functioning. How does your wife think about this, the revolution?
Yeah, my wife is the best supporter for me. Yeah. When we arrived here, we ran from the Tantlang. She is still pregnant and we have a baby. Sometimes I want to go to the place where it is safe. But yeah, this is the final fight. We have to do our best.
That was a clip we just heard of you visiting the doctor, hearing him in his own words describe what he was doing, why he was doing it. We have the footage from the film and hearing his own voice of who this doctor is, explaining himself. But what can you tell us beyond what the camera was able to pick up of spending time with him, why you wanted to include him, the impression you made on him, how he might stand for as a greater archetype to the Chin people you spend time with? What can you tell us beyond what we saw in that clip and what we heard from him?
Yeah, absolutely. So Dr. Amos, I think he's a really important character in the film because he highlights that it's not just the fight that's ongoing. It's not just armed resistance. You know, he's a member of the civil disobedience movement, which I'm sure many of your listeners will know, the CDM. So that's the ongoing strike, the general strike that was launched amongst public servants in the wake of the coup. You know, if the military is now suddenly the government, well, working in any public institution means you work for the military, and people like Dr. Amos and his absolutely incredible wife Rebecca, the nurse, were such people. So they joined that. That's their part of this resistance. Again, it's multifaceted here. And the doctor and Amos and Rebecca, they left. They initially joined the protests there in Yangon, and as things heated up, they returned back to Tantlang in Chin State, the town a lot of our documentary is focused around. And actually, they were interestingly, the story in the online article attached to the film goes a bit deeper into their backstory. They had returned to Tantlang, as I said, and were operating and providing surgery to resistance fighters and others, but in more like clandestine type operating spaces. They weren't able to work in the hospital. If they were anywhere near there, they'd be arrested and put in prison. I mean, go figure. It's an extraordinary time when your doctors, nurses, teachers, and so on are arrested and tortured and so on. I mean, that's just, it's quite an exceptional concept to consider. Exceptional not being the right, but an extraordinary concept to consider. So yeah, they'd effectively become enemies of the state, and we're doing these, but I think he says, like, my role as a doctor, like, I've always wanted to be a doctor. My whole thing is to help people. And, that's, I think you'd meet any old doctor or nurse in the world, that's their thinking, right? Or teacher wants to teach. They want to educate. They want to, there's these fundamental, wonderful elements. And I think, the pandemic here in Australia really highlighted just how much doctors, nurses, teachers are the backbone of our society in many ways. You can lose your investment bankers tomorrow and the world would probably be a better place. But we had this story unfold where they'd just finished operating, and this was in the beginnings of the attack on Tantlang, and they came out of the operating theatre and the town was on fire, not far from where they were. The buildings were on fire and they could hear gunshots. And they were like, all right, well, geez, what do we do? Now, they had an 18-month-old son, an infant, across the other side of town. So through past where the battle was unfolding. So the battle was the CDF and the CNA were fighting, gunfighting with the military, and meanwhile artillery fire and buildings catching on fire and so on. So it's just painting the picture. It's pretty intense landscape that they're confronted with. Their son is on the other side of town with the grandparents. So what do? They had a bicycle between them, and Rebecca was 6 months pregnant. They made a decision that they had to get back to their son, and then they would, get the family together and flee like everybody else was. But before they could do that, they had to ride that bicycle, Amos riding, Rebecca on the back, think sort of rickety Burmese bicycle. They rode through that firefight and turned a corner, and there were two Burmese soldiers, one with his gun drawn at them. Amos said, I just thought we were dead. As that thought came through his mind, that soldier was dropped to the ground. He'd been shot in the head by a CNA sniper. And they were like, oh, shit, like, what's happening here? The other Burmese soldier, I think, in shock, or perhaps maybe recognizing how pregnant Rebecca was, and maybe even a touch of humanity there, just looked at them and waved and said, "Go now, go, go, go!" And they rode for their lives through that battle, and heard another gunshot, looked back, and that soldier was also shot dead by another Chin National Army soldier. So, pretty radical thing. I mean, tell me if there's not a film in that somewhere. But they end up getting to their family home. They got reunited with the little son, and subsequently left the town. And so again, actually, as a surgeon, his skill set is pretty unique, right, for that part of the world. And he was approached by the CDF and members of the CNA to take over what it was an abandoned hospital in the village of Takir. And it's where I meet the doctor. We come later. So they arrived at this hospital. Again, Rebecca heavily pregnant. Two of her fellow nurse friends joined them. And so between the three nurses and the doctor, they set about opening up this hospital. Now, it's the only hospital in this district. I think it services something like 56 villages. It's the area is, I mean, I can't give you a geographic reference, but it's a ginormous region, right? And so every soldier in the resistance, every local person, all the IDPs, the refugees, everyone and anyone who has a problem is coming to that hospital. And again, when they took that over, there was an abandoned building. There wasn't a knife. There wasn't a set of aspirin. There was nothing. So it's quite extraordinary, I think, what they've been able to achieve there through donations, coming in from abroad, financing the purchase of equipment and medical supplies, most of which is coming across from the Indian border through a network of doctors and nurses and transport operators. There's a hard border. There's a hard line across now. If you head further south into Chin State, like where the Tatmadaw are, you risk your life to drive through that region and to go and buy medicine. If they found medicine in your car, they assume you're part of the resistance, and I imagine you'll be taken to prison or executed on the spot. So they've been unable to get supplies within the country itself. So a lot of this is coming across the same border that we came across to visit these people. But today, a year on, this hospital, or not even a year on, but it was about 6 months after that whole story I told you had unfolded, that they're now operating what is a pretty amazing, still woefully under-resourced and overly worked. They're working somewhat 24/7 or as required, So, look, he's an extraordinary family. The good news, of course, is they've delivered 21 babies in that hospital in the time they've been there, of which one of them was their newborn, the one, so they got through the battle, they made it to the hospital, and then actually he delivered his own child in that hospital. So that's, it's kind of a nice little moment I had to share with him late night. We had a chat about all that. But look, it's the same thinking. He's like, this is what we're doing. We don't have, the guys and girls don't have the guns. We don't have the weapon. We don't have the medical equipment or the medicines. But with what we've got, we have to keep going. We have to keep going because we have to win. There is no turning back. He described the type of torture that the soldiers, if they're caught, the resistance fighters, what they'll go through. He described the trauma of being there. Like his family live in the United States. There's a large Chin community in Indianapolis, actually. That's where the hub of the Chin diaspora are. And his mother's there. He was a very functional, upwardly mobile surgeon and a nurse, right? So they had passports. They could travel the world. But he's chosen to give that up and live in that village, being the main doctor to basically the only surgeon. So if anything goes wrong, he continues to send me images of various amputations he's doing on any given week. So it's still pretty harrowing. I still get my reminders that, oh yeah, shit's still going on. Actually, long story short, in the film, we meet. I won't give that away. But there's a moment in the film where the doctor really comes into his own and helps out a couple of our characters in the end. Dr. Amos, Rebecca, and that little team doing everything they can. We were welcome again with such little in the way of food and all the bits and pieces. The locals there really looked after us. We had warm beds to sleep in. We had food provided by the local community. It was a pretty powerful time to be around in there, and also to show. I think the importance for me as the filmmaker, as the reporter, was to show that it's not just people fighting with the guns that are behind this revolution or this battle. It takes all sorts, and Amos's role along with the nurses is just, he's kind of almost like a superstar actually in the community over there. Like he's revered because without him, they got nothing. He's carrying a huge burden, which is evident in the program. There's some moments with him that are very emotional and challenging, obviously for him, but even as the filmmaker, moments where you really, someone's really opening up to you, and how to show that with due respect. I don't often smoke cigarettes, but definitely after that interview, we went and I think we smoked half a pack between us. And we were I was just like, oh, okay, that was heavy. But he's like, yeah, it was. But you know what? Use it. I want people to see it because that's what it's about here, man. There's not an easy day here at this hospital. There's no fancy waiting room, or there's no like 7-Eleven on the corner to go and get a candy bar at, while you wait for your mum to come get discharged. It's like, this is real, and we must win. And again, I think he even closes out the film like it's one of the last comments really is like we must win. So.
Yeah, that's heavy. That's stuff you hear all the time from activists. It's just the courage, the sacrifice, the way they're learning on the fly things that you just couldn't imagine oneself. I couldn't imagine myself in that situation, having to learn the kinds of things and make the kind of decisions that they're making. And their story has so much value, so much integrity to give those people a voice and share their story. And that's what you've done with the documentary. So it's great to have something out there on a bigger platform. And I also really appreciate you coming on to talk about a bit of the behind the scenes, not just of the documentary, but your own commentary and engagement in Myanmar now, as well as in previous years. And I I think I speak for many viewers that just have a real great appreciation that you made this happen, because there's just been so little of this breaking through, and there's so much of it to share, and so yeah, that's it's been wonderful to see the documentary and to talk to you. And just before we close here, is there anything else you want to add about your experience or perspectives that we haven't covered yet in the interview?
Look, I think we've covered, like, it's been absolute pleasure to be a guest on the podcast today, and I do hope that, you know, those listening in can, you know, if the link's there to watch the film, that they check it out. And because I think the visual medium that I operate in, you know, putting faces to these names, putting, you know, real moments with these people on camera, I think that helps, you know, people understand it, because it's real, it's raw, right? You see their faces, you see that, you hear the young soldier who shot a Burmese soldier for the first time, who, you know, tells me that he had nightmares after that because he wasn't cold-blooded yet. I mean, the kid was just a little farmer before this whole thing. Like, there's all these moments through. I mean, I don't want to scare people off, but definitely there was normally I'd finish these programs, because this program, before it's on the internet, on YouTube and so on, is actually, it's a primetime slot here on Australian television for those that actually still watch television. But nonetheless, normally when the shows go out, I recently did a film on Hawaiian sovereignty or tourism in Bali. Like, they're very different. People come at you, they're like, wow, that was cool. Or like, nice thing. Or, wow, Kelly Slater, wow, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay. This one, my phone didn't ring for 20 minutes. And I was like, oh shit, I hope it was like, okay. It was, people were like actually just trying to find themselves. They were like, oh, that was heavy. And I didn't know. And that's for me, the proudest thing is, I was like, it's not about me, but the point is, it's like, you met those people. You meet Dr. Amos, you meet Chung, the commander, you meet Emily, the law student, you meet IDPs along the way, and each one of them gives you something what they've given up for this story, and again, you can read about it and you can see a photo and you can see it, but then to see it and hear it and have it all put together in you know, a moving documentary is, I think, where it really cuts through. You know, it's where people go, oh, they're human and they're like us, and you know, if you have a younger adult child or an older brother or sister, you're like, oh, that's just like them. Like, they're the same age in life. And look at my kid here is at university, he's at college, UCLA, and he's surfing, or, you know, skateboarding and playing basketball, or like snowboarding. You know, it's like, whoa. And I think that's really important to remember, that they're just, you know, they're just like us. They're other people, and they had the same things. They had Myanmar Idol, they had hip hop, they had Facebook, they had all those things, and it was ripped out. And they've all made the extraordinary decision, both in Chin State, but again across Myanmar, that the only way forward is to fight back and defeat this military once and for all. So, if anything, people listening to the show, I just like them to watch the documentary and feel free to reach out and let me know what you think, but also share it on, send it to your local politicians or the NGO, you know, just pass it out there. Like, it's again, I'm not chasing view numbers. Like, I've got them on plenty of programs. It's more like, these are the stories that they take a lot of time, and they're hard to get, they're hard to make, but they're worth it. And people watch it, I think it's gonna, you know, it makes a difference.
Thanks so much for that. And as we move away from the interview, we're going to be playing a clip on the outro of a young woman who I believe is speaking Chin language. There's, for those who want to understand what she's saying, of course, watch the documentary and there's subtitles there. But as we close out and as we start to put this clip in, why don't you tell us a bit about the background of who this person is and what she's saying?
Just quickly, she's an amazing. I met her. I was in Camp Victoria. It's the jungle headquarters of the Chin National Army. Towards the end of our trip, and there's a lot of new recruits there training. We went up in the mountains, digging trenches and running in the rain. And then at the end of all of that, I meet young Emily, who's 22 years old, from Chin State, was studying international law in Yangon. aspirations of getting into politics, believe it or not, given the story here we're talking about. And like so many others, when the protests happened and the young Angel, the first person to be shot in the protest, really made an impact on her, and she decided, just like the others in the film, that she would leave her law degree and her friends. And, you know, she shared with me all their Facebook photos hanging out in the mall and getting dressed up and going to karaoke bars, all of that stuff. She's like, I can't do that right now. And she headed up to the mountains with a few of her girlfriends, and they've joined in the army. And she's learned, they've had training, they know how to fire weapons. She says to me, you know, if we win, we win. If we die together. There's no, you know, this is it for us. And I've got to say, I ask her, she's telling me about how she's learned to use the gun and how women play an important role in the revolution as well. So, you know, and no one forget that when we win, you know, women's role will be even higher again, which is a cool thing as well, because, you know, it's fairly patriarchal society. So these young ones are going, this is our moment as well to sort of step up and be part of this revolution. And I do ask in passing at the end, so with all that training with your weapon, if a Burmese soldier came here right now, could you shoot him? Could you kill him? She's like, yep, no problem. And she just gives me this huge smile with her red lipstick and her manicured fingers, and she just was like, absolutely. Like, you know, it was a real, again, it's like, wow, you know, I'm blown away when I hear those things from these people. So young Emily, I think, yeah, she's it's that sacrifice once again. And I think along the way, whether it's a deliberate choice to sacrifice, as in the doctor or Emily, or it's the IDPs and the refugees, those that have been forced to sacrifice everything they had because it's been taken or burnt down, that's what the film will show. The film shows you the extreme and unwavering commitment to winning this fight. And I think they will. It's not too far away. So the more the international community helps and the more people get involved in the Myanmar story, I think the sooner Emily and Dr. Amos and Chung and others in the film will go back to, their former lives and rebuild what's been taken from them.
22-year-old Emily grew up in a village in Chinland. Before the coup, she was studying international law in the former capital, Yangon. Overnight, everything changed.
နည်းနည်းတော့ကြောက်တာပေါ့အဲ့လိုမျိုးဆေးတွေဘာတွေမတိုက်ဖူးတဲ့ခါကျတော့နည်းနည်းတော့ကြောက်တယ်ဒါပေမဲ့လည်းကိုတန်းပြင်းတဲ့လူမျိုးအတွက်တိုက်ရမယ်ဆိုရင်လည်းရပါတယ်တင်တဲ့ခဲ့ရပေါ့နော်တင်တဲ့အများကြီးခက်ခဲတယ်ဒါပေမဲ့တင်ခဲ့တယ်ဒီဟာတွေလည်းတင်ရတယ်
So with all that training, if a Burmese soldier came past here now, could you kill him?
Yeah, no problem.
But the reality of war for these new recruits can be devastating. This is our journey to Chinland. It's just begun, and I'm pretty sure that it's going to get a lot more bumpy from here. Our first stop is the headquarters of the local Chinland Defence Force, but getting even that far is no easy.
Control
can also visit either the Insight Myanmar Better Burma website, or specifically go to Studies, or email info@betterburma.org. If you'd like to give me another way, thank you so much for your consideration and support.
Yeah.